So this model is a Autumn woman with our traditional cradle board. The inspiration I got from this model actually came from a really good friend of mine, Philip Morales. He was working with folks in Salt River on learning how to craft different items, and this was one of them that he was telling me about, was crafting this traditional cradle board. And so the cradle board is something that we would have the children in. Babies would be in them while the women were doing work, until they were able to start walking. But the cradle board kind of fell out of fashion in late 1800s, like early 1900s. It wasn't used as much. And so I'd never saw one of these growing up. A lot of the research that I was able to find was talking about how these weren't really crafted very often past 1900. And then in talking with other community members, I found some other folks who had actually crafted these. And so it was really cool seeing these modern day photographs and recreations of this cradle board when they're not crafted as much anymore. The other part that inspired me to do this model was really a conversation that I had within a community meeting in Gila River, where I was speaking with the youth council there, and one of the young women, and talking about this project and talking about the vision that I had, a young woman there said, "I really want to see a woman model in our traditional dress. I really want to see that, we have this representation of what we were like before colonialism." So with this model, there's kind of two versions of it. There's one that's covered up, and it's kind of like, in my mind, a contemporary version of the model. The other one is a more traditional dress one that doesn't have a top. And so the idea behind that really was, before colonialism, our people did not dress very heavily, right? So we lived in desert climate. It was super hot. So typically, most men, women, and children wore a minimal amount of clothing. For women, this was often they were topless. For children, a lot of times they didn't wear anything. That's kind of our traditional way of dressing. And it really struck me that this young woman at the youth council was like, this is what I want to see in this representation of us. And it was really hard for me because I really wanted to respectfully show this facet of our life. But I also wanted to try to figure out how do I minimize kind of the sexuality that goes into that. Because there are some historical photos that I was able to find, but a lot of times it almost seemed like there was a weird sexualization that went into that. And so the thought that occurred to me was tying that traditional dress with what the intended purpose of breasts are, which is breasts are for babies. So I wanted to see if I could combine these two ideas into creating a female model, but have it imbued with motherhood. And so I figured that this creation of the traditional cradle board would be a good way to showcase this femininity, but also making sure it's respectful. For the clothed version, one of the ways that I got the inspiration for the clothes was actually a project that was done by Kyle Knox, who's out of Gila River. And one of the things that he did was he did this photo shoot that was a modern kind of recreation of Autumn dress. All of the models were clothed, and it was a very respectful version of the way that we dressed pre-colonialism. And I love the way that he did it. For the dress version, that's kind of where I got the inspiration for what the clothes would look like. For the model who's in the more traditional form, I actually got that model. Originally came from a photographer by the name of Carlo Gentile, which was like the 1850s, 1860s, somewhere in that early time. And for the model itself and the modeling process, this was one that was a little bit interesting because even asking for something that is topless or has nudity in it, there's a whole set of kind of things that trigger off of that to make sure that the design is tasteful. But I'm really glad that they worked with me on trying to get this design tasteful. They had a lot of questions around, where the source image comes from. They had a lot of questions around just what the intention of the project was, and I really appreciate that they took the time to ask those questions before just mindlessly crafting the model. And so that was really cool. This actually turned out to be one of my favorite models so far out of this whole project, because the level of intricacy and design and thoughtfulness that this designer put into like sculpting the cradle board especially was so amazing. And I really hope that people get this vision of what I was trying to create, which is really thinking back on how we traditionally dressed, and also kind of this interlacing of motherhood into the model, into the importance in our traditional life, but also the importance today of mothers and motherhood and the safety of the baby and the connection that mothers had with that child.